I should probably slip out. There's a snow thrower being operated next door,
No.
and
I want to hear from you about Canada and the whole thing. You are like our resident expert on everything on everything Canada. He broke it down on Nick's. He went on Nick's channel and was breaking down for them the Emergency Powers Act. But I think that's like late night. A lot of people probably didn't miss it. Probably didn't see that. And I was watching, but your perspective about what's been going on with Trudeau, if you haven't covered it yet, which I doubt you have, on this channel, I think that we really sort of need to know more about the Emergency Powers Act and the ramifications, and how does that translate on the street in Ottawa? But, I mean, there's probably been more information that's come out over the last couple of days anyway as to like exactly how they're planning on using this to do things that they couldn't do before this measure was enacted. So,
well, there's a couple of really interesting provisions of it. One, they can compel tow truck drivers to work, and if they don't, they can face jail time. So that's a whole hell of a thing. But another one is that they've implemented something where they can freeze bank accounts just basically on the police's say-so. And normally, in order to do that, you'd have to bring a court application. You'd have to, put it in front of a court. But now they can just say, oh, yeah, we think this guy is involved in the protests, freeze all of their bank accounts.
wow.
And they're apparently planning to do that for people who donated even fairly small amounts to the Give, Send, Go, because that was, that list was leaked. And I'm just thinking, it would have been pretty easy to sign someone else up as a donor on that thing. Or, and the source of this is apparently some hacker. So who knows that it hasn't been salted with like 10 or 15 names of people he dislikes. It's we're really going to trust this list from some rando, So I'm just like, okay, well, it's pretty terrifying. And if you happen to get named incorrectly, like let's say they think you're there because some, an officer incorrectly enters a license plate, you could end up coming home and finding that like your bank card doesn't work, and you've got no access to money. So, and there's very little remedy for that right now.
Wow.
So it's
having your bank account frozen is a massive deal. I know this as someone who's frozen bank accounts, that people freak out, and for good reason. It's like you can't, your life is in turmoil until that's resolved. And this could theoretically, if it's frozen, could be frozen for who knows how long. I mean, months.
However long the government decides to continue acting under the Emergencies Act, it sounds like.
That's insanity. That's really, really crazy. Let me ask. Go ahead.
The notion that they could, for instance, most jobs nowadays, it's hard to get paid in cash. If it's saying, hey, I need to get paid in cash because they've frozen all my accounts. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. So it's going to be real interesting. It's going to be real. And I think a lot of the people who are for this, because, this being seen as sort of a far right protest, there's a lot of people going, oh yeah, these guys are reprehensible. And let's assume you're correct about that. But you know what? They will use this again now that door has been opened, and they will absolutely, there's going to be somebody you like, even if you hate the truckers out there, somebody you like will have this used against them going forward. So, a protest like BLM, and whatever chaos was going around that, they might say, okay, we're going to start freezing bank accounts. And, think about everybody who donated to that. That's a very different, it's, I feel like a lot of the people who are like, oh, I'd never give to that, might have given to one of those other kinds of campaigns. And it's terrifying. Like
the question is
not the kind of thing that should be happening in a free country.
Right.
What was their justification for it, though? Go ahead, Alita.
That's okay. I was going to say that the question, that should be asked here is what is the standard for deciding or for deciding that it's okay to freeze bank accounts based on this kind of activity, right? Because in the future, we're talking about, let's say it's the shoes on the other foot. You've got other political activists that are engaging in certain kinds of activities, and then the government says, well, we're gonna label this terrorism so that we can do whatever we want to do, or we're gonna label this whatever we want. What the question becomes, what is the standard that we can all hold those politicians to say, no, you're not allowed to use this in this kind of a situation?
Well, for the Emergencies Act, it's supposed to be a national emergency, and this really contemplates things like wars or large-scale disasters that we're really not seeing. They've said that the justification is the economic damage, and I'm like, okay, but the Emergencies Act says basically that you have to say that you can't deal with it under any other law, and Canadian law already allows them to do quite a bit. So I don't know how they get to this. They're saying that it seriously threatens the ability of the government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada. And I'm going, no, that's an exaggeration. That's overblown. In terms of the level of, evidence to freeze an account, it's a reasonable suspicion test, but that really ends up being knocked down to just subjective suspicion, because how do you fight it? We're going to freeze all your accounts, and then you're going to walk into a law firm and say, I need help to get my accounts unfrozen. And the first question they're going to say is, okay, how are we getting paid?
Yeah.
We're not launching this if we can't get paid. So good luck.
Yeah.
And as far as continuing the protest, is it because I understand they're also able to they will force tow truck operators to take trucks.
Yeah.
If that's what the goal is here, what is to stop these truckers from, instead of parking their cars, just driving 2 miles an hour in a circle?
Well, what they'd be saying is they're going to stop the truck, pull the driver out, and have the tow truck driver tow it at that point. They did sort of contemplate that notion of people, because that's one of the things they're upset about is these slow convoys.
Mm-hmm.
But the tow truck drivers, I mean, some of them are refusing to do the work because they agree with the protest. Mm-hmm. Some of them are refusing to do the work because they think it's unsafe and dangerous. If you're going in, this isn't like towing, a Civic or whatever else. These are big trucks, and you've got to go in and basically bypass the air brake systems to get them going. And so towing a vehicle where the driver doesn't want, the owner of this doesn't want to cooperate is, kind of risky. Nobody wants to be under a tow truck or under a truck trying to mess around with the air brakes if the driver might, suddenly throw it in gear. And so what they've been saying is listen, there's not enough police support for us to tow these vehicles because we need to be safe, in doing so. And if we're going to say, well, you're refusing because you think it's unsafe, but we're going to compel you to do it anyway.
Yeah.
There's also liability shields. So, they're shielded from liability for making those directions. So if you're that tow truck driver and you get sucked into an axle and crushed, well, that's really on you now. You make the call. I've got some serious issues with this whole notion of forcing people to work. I think people should be able to choose whether or not to work. Vision for, compensation, but normally we get to decide that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could say no. You can say no. Forced labor is slavery.
I was going to say, in the United States, I mean, we don't often need to invoke the 13th Amendment, but that would be a situation where that would be invoked.
Yeah,
it's funny because if it's a company, you could, if let's say the tow truck is owned by a company, you could force the company to move the truck. What's it called? I forget the term of art it's used. It's in contract law a lot. What's it called?
Specific performance.
Specific performance. Yeah. You could ask for that. And two things. First, about the driving slowly, Joe. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say about specific performance. So that's a very, it's very rare for a court to actually
compel specific performance.
Yeah, exactly. And specifically because of
That's what I'm saying,
13th
yeah.
Amendment concerns. So that is a possibility under law, yes, of course, but
that's in America where we have a constitution. We also have laws against slavery here. I don't know if
The
they have
third-
that
well,
up in Canada.
I mean,
Two
we
things.
normally don't allow normally it would be extremely difficult to get specific performance when you're talking about labor. You're much more likely to be able to get specific performance, for instance, about land, if there's a particular piece of land that's critical, or
right,
maybe an artwork,
because
where
it's particularly unique, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no amount of money can actually replace the
there
production
is one
of that.
Mona Lisa. I have contracted to buy it. There is no amount of money that will substitute for that because I can't make a second one. So they might say you actually get the artwork. But to say, like, if I hired somebody to mow my lawn and they said, and we agreed they're gonna get $100 for that, and they say, you know what, it's not worth it, I'm not doing it. There's no way that I can get the court to say this guy has to mow your lawn.
Correct. Yeah.
And if I go and hire somebody else to mow my lawn and it ends up costing $200 because that first guy wildly underpriced it, I might get $200, to cover that cost. But they're not going to force somebody like that's messed up.
I know. Well, I know here, like, see, even in that example, if there's a lawn mowing company and the guy says, I don't want to mow your lawn, the court could direct the company, well, you have to get somebody to mow the lawn at specific performance. You guys, the company has to do it. Usually for individuals, you're right. And there was a famous case with I forget the name of the singer, Gladys Knight, where they tried to get her to perform. They were like, well, you got a contract. So they wanted her to perform. And they were like, no, you can't force her to do it. But if the company, you can force the
pips. You can force the pips to do it.
to hire somebody else, right? But two things though. I know here, like Joe, we were saying, could they drive 5 miles an hour on a 40? Here in the United States, you can't do that. It's like a 10-mile, like you can only drive 10 miles below the speed limit before you're blocking traffic. So I'm not sure if that's the rules in Canada. But the one thing I know they were blocking the bridge, that major bridge, and I was like all in the news, major bridge block. I'm assuming that's illegal. So is the Canadian government saying that funding the truckers is funding illegal activity? Because I know here that's kind of how they work around it. If you're doing something illegal and we're funding you, even BLM, if BLM is doing something illegal and we're funding you, then that allows the government to give it and says, well, you're funding illegal activity of that conspiracy thing. Is that their argument, or is their argument that this protest the whole protest thing is illegal and we're going to stop funding the protest?
They basically said that it is, funding illegal activity, but it goes beyond, like, initially they got a court order to say we're going to freeze the Give Send Go account. And Give Send Go basically said, hey, we're American, go pound sand, which gets into questions of, like, would the U.S. extradite over that violation? I don't know. The U.S. tends to be a little more protective on that sort of thing. But but now they want to go after each individual donor and freeze their entire account. So, like, let's say you have $10 million and you donated $100, they're going to freeze your $10 million. And I'm going, that's wild, right? That's
insane.
That is
insane.
Basically ending someone's whole life.
Yeah.
Well,
so
these are extraordinary powers. They're not supposed to be used lightly.
Freedom, baby, freedom.
There you go. America, yeah.
America. So, damn.
But, like, this is supposed to be used for, like, society is breaking down because, there's a full-on civil war, or we're attacked by aliens or something wild, not like the last time a similar power, and they actually abolished the previous War Measures Act, but the War Measures Act was sort of the father of this bit of legislation. And it's been used 3 times. The first time was World War I. And it's worth noting that one of the things they did with it was intern Ukrainians. The second time was World War II. And it's worth noting that one of the things they did with it is interning the Japanese. And then the third time was the FLQ crisis, which had like 200 bombs being set off on the street. The FLQ had apparently stolen like a literal ton of TNT.
Wow.
And they were kidnapping people. And one of them got murdered. And I'm thinking, This is not the same, right? As much as this is, saying like the U.S. is a critical trade partner for Canada, blocking that is a huge deal. People are really, really angry in Ottawa because they haven't been able to sleep for 2 weeks because of people on the horns. Like, I get that they're angry.
Yeah.
But it's still not 200 bombs. Like,
yeah.
It's
But
such
there's
a
also
big jump.
But this law has no
I
impact.
think
this law.
this.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I think you're. It sounds scary to death. I got to actually have to get out of here, but that sounds scary to death. And good luck to you guys up there, man, because you're right. This doesn't sound like 200 bombs. I know here in New York, they did the Black Lives Matter thing over the George Washington Bridge. The cops come, they move everything. There's no War Powers Act. It's like they move the people and we move on with our lives, right? We get like a couple of, maybe an hour worth of madness, but this is insane. For blocking a bridge, emergency powers, it just doesn't add up. But good luck to you guys up there, man.
I mean, one of the things is that normally they could just go in and clear people off. The problem that they're having is just a tactical problem, which is that once you start including these big, the semis, the police have a real issue because their tactics in terms of breaking up these protests really assume large groups of people on foot. And it's a very different equation. Like, you can't kettle a semi. If you're going in and you're like, hey, we got guys with riot shields, you're not going to line those guys up in front of something that can mow them down. It's basically, you're looking at this like, okay, they got, 40 tanks here. How do we break this up? But there's a lot that they could have been trying that they're not trying. It's
with respect
overkill.
to freezing the assets, this has no impact on Americans who donate. I mean, there's no way that they could possibly freeze the account on America. Like, if I send money to them, I don't see how they could possibly have no jurisdiction over me.
I can't see a U.S. bank cooperating, but if your bank operates in Canada and the U.S., they might decide that they have to cooperate because of the potential for Canada to go after people.
Wow.
So
I don't see how Canada has jurisdiction over me. That just seems astonishing to me. The claim that such a thing would be an issue would be something that, even because my bank that I'm in happens to work in Canada, that all of a sudden now my assets, I'm subject to the jurisdiction of freaking Trudeau. Are you kidding me?
The other thing that could happen is, like, let's say you made a donation today. They might say, okay, you are now in violation of the Emergencies Act, and maybe they can't go after your bank account because you're here, because you're in the States, and I suspect the States would tell Canada to go pound sand, but Canada might issue an arrest warrant, and the U.S. might say, okay, listen, we're not going to extradite, even if Canada requests it. But 30 years down the road, you decide you want to visit Toronto, and you fly in, and they're like, hi, welcome to Canada. Turns out there's a warrant for you, and I guess you're going to be staying a little longer than you expected.
Wow. That is crazy.
Yeah.
Hang on, guys. My battery seems to be exhausted. I don't know how that happened.
I stepped away a little moment ago because one of the things I got was a warrant for arrest. Not my arrest, but I ordered... there was an American who came here to film a 30-day wilderness survival challenge. And I did a video on this because they ended up getting charged with a bunch of parks violations because they did things like fishing with worms and operating a drone in a park. And I mean, this is Banff, so it's basically like Yellowstone kind of thing. It's super protected.
And really beautiful in Banff. Like, really beautiful.
It's beautiful, but everything is super protected, so it's super locked down. So they cut down trees to make a tree fort, which, big no-no in that park. But this guy, there's a warrant for his arrest here in Canada. I don't think he's likely to come here to deal with it, but we'll see.
He'll never come. You're saying basically you can never come back.
Yeah, I don't see Canada successfully extraditing somebody for parks violations, but he's probably just going to say, listen, I'll never go to Canada again, and that'll solve the problem.
Yeah.
And but it just means that he'll have a warrant for the rest of time.
Yeah.
And if he
Does it
ever
work?
about
Does it work from one province to another? Like, is this a Canada wide? Assuming someone does have such an issue, is that a Canada wide thing? Because we have different states, but we have comedy between one states and another. It's spelled COMITY. So there's but as far as like getting, I'm sure extradition would be relatively easy from one province to another. But if there's an arrest warrant that's issued in Ontario, is that going to be affecting someone who goes to Saskatchewan, that they'll know about it, or they probably won't know about it, or how
So
does
the
that
way
work?
this ends up working is that these warrants are good throughout Canada, in most cases, and I think this one would be. And basically, what ends up, so let's say you've got a warrant in British Columbia and you are in Ontario, they'll probably arrest you in Ontario, and then they send a message over to BC and say, "Hey, are you willing to cover the costs of having this guy shipped? Do you want him back?" And BC may say, "You know what? Yes, we do." In which case they'll do what's called a 6-day remand. And that basically is that they say, okay, so the test for that is there a warrant, like a valid warrant? And are you the person described? Which is a real low test. Like, it could be that you are obviously somebody who should be released, but they'll just say, okay, and they want to send you out. We'll throw you in a cart. They got 6 days to get you to British Columbia and bring you in front of a court there. So or BC might say, no, we don't want him, in which case they'll probably release you and say, okay, you're released on this warrant, but it's also still out there as a warrant. Like, it's never been properly dealt with. So unless you actually go and decide to go to BC and deal with the file, it'll still be there, and they can still arrest you every time you get a traffic ticket or every time you otherwise run into the police. So sometimes people have these out of province warrants, and it can be a real big deal in terms of like, all right, I've been arrested 20 times on this warrant that they still don't want to, because whether or not they actually want somebody brought in will really depend. Like, if it's, an attempted murder or something like that, they'll say, yes, we want this guy, bring him back. But let's say it's something like,
a tree fort.
Yeah, or, a mischief. You keyed somebody's car. They're probably going to say,
screw that.
It's not worth us paying the money to bring the guy back. He's got to walk here himself so that he stops getting arrested. But yeah, 6-day remand warrant is pretty terrible. And
the last question I have for you in this interview I'm doing with you.
It's good. This is good information.
There's something about 7 days that your ministry has to act within 7 days to confirm this emergency powers act or something to that effect? Is there something that they have to do, and when is that supposed to be happening?
That's happening today. I think they probably will have done it by now. So basically they have to bring it back in front of Parliament to say, hey, is this still going to go on? Now, the declaration takes effect immediately, because this is, again, for use, like, with wars.
They have enough votes that they're going to get that it's passing.
So there are several parties in Canada. It's not sort of the two-party system, and they all have seats. So the Bloc Québécois has said that they will not support it. They're a Quebec party, but they won't support it in large part because Quebec has a memory of the last time the War Measures Act was invoked, and they're not super thrilled about that. So they'll not vote for it. The Conservative Party is saying, we're not going to vote for it. This is messed up. The NDP, so the Liberal Party doesn't have enough votes to make this happen on their own. They're a minority government, but so they need another party to support them. And the NDP has said that this reflects a failure of government, but that they will reluctantly vote for it all the same. And I'm like, you cowards. If you think this is a failure of government, stand up and say, no, we're not doing it.
And they vote in lockstep with each other, or like some is that something that?
Yeah, we actually have what they call whipped votes, and most important votes are whipped. And what that means is that if you don't vote with the direction, that you will be kicked out of the party. And if you're kicked out of the party, you are almost certainly not going to get reelected.
Wow.
You
Speaking
end
of
sitting as an
kicking
independent.
people out of parties, we have with us Kurt on civil law. How
Look
are
at
Yes.
you with the intros.
Thank you.
Off the cuff.
I apologize for being late. As I'm sure I've told many people, I moved recently, and so I've been
Yeah.
running a whole bunch of errands. But I've been listening to you for about the last hour, and
Oh, good.
I'm sorry, Runkle, that you live in a fallen state.
It's when I was in law school, I had profs tell me that they were like, listen, they passed a new Emergencies Act. Expect to never see it used in your lifetime.
Wow.
Like
Uh-huh.
this is, and here we are. Like, I don't like being in a, where we're making history.
This is exactly why they didn't include this clause in our Constitution, because they discussed it, because they're not idiots. They thought about this possibility, and they thought about putting a clause in our Constitution that would be something like this in the event of emergency break glass provision. And they're like, we're not going to do that, because if we put that in there explicitly, someone is going to misuse that. And so I think your country's experience is testament to that wisdom. Under our standard reviews, we have mechanisms to deal with emergencies because the facts are such that the tests we normally apply would apply and allow the government to do things they wouldn't normally do in emergencies. But it's not that we've changed the Constitution. It's just the facts changed the situation. But in your situation, it's like, let's just suspend all the rights, including apparently forced servitude, which is super exciting. That's even worse than the bank freezing, in my humble opinion. But that's just me.
I think it's pretty messed up, and especially because there was talk of like the tow truck companies, but a lot of these companies are like one guy who owns a truck.
I mean, in the United States, you could absolutely get, well, I say absolutely, at least theoretically, you could get specific performance against a company. Although it's unlikely because it's a very rare remedy, but at least theoretically. But still, at the end of the day, you have to find people. And so if you bring in the company a month later for an order to show cause, it's like, hey, you haven't performed on this specific performance. I'm poking at you some more. What's your order to show cause? It's like, well, we literally can't find the people. Here's all the steps we've taken. Here's all the things we've done to try to find people to execute on this agreement. We literally can't find the people. There's nothing for us to do. And so, that would be a satisfactory answer, at least in my view, under legal judgment. It's not that we don't want to. We literally can't, because we can't find the people to do it. But apparently in Canada, you can make individuals somehow do things, which seems extremely odd and backwards.
Under the Emergencies Act, you can compel people to perform essential services. So this was again intended to be something for, a war, right?
We get its fundamental purpose. Jordan Peterson had on his podcast recently one of the founders, or creators of the Constitution or whatever, who basically said this is a whole bunch of bullshit. So, and he's the guy who kind of wrote it, so he would probably know. So,
yeah, and it's just like, it's messed up that you've got this, you can get up to 5 years in jail and $5,000. Now the amounts are kind of fun.
I always liked laws like that in the United States too, because we have the same thing. It never made any sense to me. It's like, why do we have this 5 years and 5,000? Who cares about the $5,000 at this point?
The thing is, it used to be a whole lot of money because it was back in the 80s. Nobody ever felt like, nobody thought that this was going to be a thing, and so nobody went back and updated the amounts. And so,
can I take the $5,000 instead?
Yeah, really.
That's
what I'm saying. Jeez,
I was
25 years for $25,000. Like, all right, you check, man. Jeez.
Yeah, my 5 years of my life is worth a lot more than.
I'm pretty sure it was worth more than in the 80s.
Yeah,
I'm not sure
inflation
is the problem there.